Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. Amateur Traveler, episode 105. Today the Amateur Traveler goes to Rhode Island.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh no, 15-hour flight, oh, I don't think I'll ever be coming home. You know I love it. I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. The first news story I have for you today has created some controversy, according to a story originally reported in the San Diego Union Tribune, and which I saw in the USA Today. Southwest Airlines is in the news in San Diego after a customer service supervisor apparently objected to the outfit worn by a college student and Hooters waitress Kyla Ebert. Ebert claims she was escorted off a Southwest Airlines flight 2 months ago for wearing, quote, a white denim miniskirt, high heel sandals, and a turquoise summer sweater over a tank top over a bra. She says that after she had taken her seat, the supervisor asked her to come out into the jetway and asked her to change. I asked what part of my outfit was offensive. Ebert says, the shirt, the skirt, he says, the whole thing. Ebert added that she was lightly dressed because she was taking a same-day trip to Tucson and back for a doctor's appointment. The temperature in Tucson that day was forecast to be between 100 and 110. She said she was asked to go home and change and return for a later flight with a less revealing outfit. She refused and the airline eventually relented. I'll put a picture in there of the outfit that she says she was wearing. I think you might be a little surprised to find what that particular service representative thought was too revealing. There's been some interesting discussion on this in various discussion boards, and one of the interesting ones that came out at airliners.net was a picture from earlier on in Southwest history of a whole bunch of Southwest Airlines flight attendants wearing miniskirts. So apparently the miniskirt was, at least at one point, considered fashionable, not objectionable by Southwest Airlines. I'd be interested in knowing what you think about this story. If you were listening to this show when it's first coming out, you should be aware that if you're planning on going to Europe, you can get potentially a free ticket on Ryanair. Ryanair is offering 6 million seats for free, where free is defined as just taxes and charges. Ryanair is a intra-Europe carrier, a low-cost carrier. They do have some additional fees like per baggage charge, so make sure you're aware of those. But this still could be a good deal for you. If you're planning on traveling to Europe, you need to book your ticket by September 10th, 2007, and travel between October 1st and February 7th. If you missed this story because you're listening to the show too late, you might think about checking out the blog, amateurtraveler.com, more regularly, as this story went up a week ago, or the discussion boards where I also posted this story. In the last news story I have for you today, according to a survey of 1,000-plus British tourists who were asked about the most disappointing tourist spot, the Eiffel Tower was their number one pick. It is frustratingly overcrowded and overpriced, they said, while Stonehenge was, quote, just a load of old rocks. Even Egypt's Great Pyramids, one of the 7 wonders of the world, made the list of underwhelming and overrated attractions because of the oppressive heat and persistent hawkers. The total list, according to these British tourists, are number 1, the Eiffel Tower, number 2, the Louvre, particularly the Mona Lisa, number 3, Times Square, number 4, Las Ramblas in Spain, number 5, Statue of Liberty, number 6, the Spanish Steps in Rome, number 7, the White House, number 8, the Pyramids of Egypt, number 9, the Brandenburg Gate in Germany, and number 10, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. For more information on all of these news stories, check out the links at amateurtraveler.com or in the iTunes enhanced version of the show. I'd like to welcome to the show Seth Brown, who's come to talk to us about Rhode Island. I wanted to do some more domestic locations, having done a lot of international ones recently. And Seth is the author of a recent book, Rhode Island Curiosities. Seth, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit? You just finished this guidebook. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, it's, as you might guess from the title, Curiosities, it's less just a guidebook to the sort of typical touristy things in Rhode Island and more, not quite a litany, but it's definitely a collection of more off-the-beaten-path sorts of things. I mean, in addition to places, it's also got a few sort of Rhode Island essential events and even some odd people who are just sort of known around the state but might not necessarily be known to people outside of the state. Until now, I guess.
Well, why don't we break down the interview then into sort of 2 parts here. One, why don't you tell us what is the beaten path, and then let's go off the beaten path and talk about some of the things that I wouldn't normally find out if I was using a different guidebook. So what do people normally do in Rhode Island? When they go visit Rhode Island, that is.
Oh, when they visit. I was going to say, what people normally do in Rhode Island is not leave. It's very provincial. And you will meet people in Rhode Island who have rarely gone outside the state and never gone outside New England. But what people do when they visit Rhode Island often is hit Newport, pretty much. Newport, as you know, has both the mansions and all the waterfront, and so the oceans is very big, seeing, sailing, kite flying, what have you there. Eating is big also. Providence is renowned for its restaurants, certainly, both on Federal Hill and elsewhere. I know that I think it was 8 years ago or so, then Providence Mayor Buddy Cianci, having heard a comment that the Boston mayor made about Providence restaurants, challenged him to a duel, essentially, of having some food critics compare Providence and Boston restaurants, and this occurred, and apparently Providence won. So it's certainly a culinary center, I guess, and that's not even including Johnson and Wales.
Johnson and Wales.
It's the Culinary Arts School.
Oh, okay.
In Rhode Island.
Okay.
And so, I mean, between that and all the restaurants, Rhode Island is a good place to eat food, I would say.
And predominantly seafood is what it's known for, I'm guessing?
I mean, yeah, there's certainly a lot of seafood. Rhode Island-specific stuff, or things that are mostly Rhode Island is famous for, such as quahogs or crab cakes or chowder houses in general. But, I mean, there's other just weird Rhode Island cuisine like coffee milk or Johnny cakes and that sort of thing.
Okay, I know Johnny Cakes coffee milk. You lost me at quahogs, though.
Yeah, quahog is how best to describe it. It's a mollusk. It's sort of like a clam, I guess, and you use a rake to harvest them.
Okay.
And then they're served much the same way that a clam would be, often with butter, drawn butter and such. They're not the state animal officially, I don't think, but they have a Rhode Island flair to them. Rhode Island has a cartoonist who I didn't put in the book, but everyone in Rhode Island knows him. His name is Don Bosquet, and his collections of cartoons have names like The Quahog Strikes Again or Return of the Quahog. If you've ever seen the show Family Guy, the whole thing takes place in a fictional town called Quahog, Rhode Island. It's an animal that's sort of quintessentially Rhode Island and is associated with the state.
Okay. What other things do people do that are on the beaten path?
I guess I don't as much, so it would be hard to say. But I mean, again, the mansions in Newport are big. Let's see. Some of the stuff certainly I put in the book. Waterfire is big. That is a celebration that occurs mostly in the summer, but also a bit into the spring and fall in Providence. Since they had the Renaissance, they've started doing these big evening celebrations where they have a bunch of big braziers. It's important to pronounce it right, otherwise it sounds like braziers. But big braziers of fire on all across the river through Providence, and then there's lots of music and food and artists and all sorts of people around. It's like a giant block party for most of the city of Providence. Waterfire usually starts in late May and runs through late October.
Okay.
So I would say that it starts a little before summer, ends a little after summer, but the bulk of it, of course, does take place during summer because that's the best time to be outside late at night.
Okay.
Yeah, what else do people come to Rhode Island for? Obviously, Brown University is famous, I guess. I don't really know what you would do there. There's the Providence Philharmonic is very good. Providence Performing Arts Center gets a lot of good shows. There are a ton of small musical venues in Providence. Really, Providence is a tremendously, given the size of it, a tremendously powerful city culturally speaking. There's just so much going on.
And let's talk size here for a minute, because for those of us who are way out west, how big is Rhode Island and how big is Providence?
Well, Rhode Island has roughly 1 million people or so it's not that big. In terms of size mile-wise, it takes about an hour if you're going the long way from one end to another. Usually, you say if you're in Rhode Island and you would want to go anywhere else in Rhode Island, an hour is pretty much the absolute maximum you might have to drive.
Okay.
Usually, if when I was growing up, it was definitely you want to go somewhere. 15 minutes is a short ride, half an hour is sort of a long ride, and 45 minutes is if you're going to the opposite side of the state.
Okay. So now let's get off the beaten path. So those are the things that people know about. What do we not know about Rhode Island? What would I miss if I came and just looked at the regular information about Rhode Island?
The main thing you'd miss is there's so many quirky characters. And these are things that, that tourists just might not know about otherwise. But we've got everything from a guy who walks through Providence and gives ghost tours. His name is Rory Raven. He's also sort of a magician and hypnotist, or mentalist, he would say. But he also does ghost tours through Providence and has a large collection of ghost stories, has interviewed lots of people about it. And he's got the name for it, obviously, and takes people around Providence. There's this great company called Big Nazo Puppets that don't make tiny puppets, but they're these life-size foam creatures is really a better word than puppets. If you haven't seen them, then descriptions don't do them justice. This is something I'll definitely give you a picture of.
Okay.
But I remember growing up at school, and these things came to our school once, and it was just spectacular. Just imagine these 6 and 7 foot giant foam creatures, one of whom is almost entirely mouth that will eat people that come up on stage. One of whom is like this tall Quasimodo character that's mostly balding but with a large nose, and one of them is entirely made of fur, and one of them has a giant mallet, and they've got like 50 of them. It's all masterminded by a guy who's got this big studio right next to City Hall in Providence.
Okay. What other things should we not miss? What do you take your friends to that the locals only know about?
What I take my friends to, because I grew up in East Greenwich, is I would go down the street to Hilltop Creamery because it's a great ice cream place. That's the kind of thing that's not particularly as off the beaten path. There's a good diner also.
I never
in
turn
East
up my nose at good ice cream, though. So
yeah, no, I grew up on it, so it's got a lot of the nostalgia there for me. There's Jigger's Diner, which is also in the book and in East Greenwich. not the oldest diner in the state or anything, but it's sort of representative of the diner culture of Rhode Island, because that was the Worcester Dining Car Company supplied a lot of diners to places like Rhode Island, and so they brought a bunch of these in, and unlike the things you see today that say diner, but they're just these sort of giant brick buildings that these are actual diners that were once dining cars.
Okay.
They've been going on for quite a number of years, since probably 1917 or whatnot. Again, I'm just thinking of things in East Greenwich, because when people visit me, what you really have to understand about Rhode Island is that when your state only takes an hour to traverse, you think of distance in sort of a different way. I'm always amazed when I talk to my friends from the Midwest or from the South who will gladly drive an hour or two just to go see something for the day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's crazy to me, having grown up in Rhode Island. If you're going an hour, you make a full day of it. And if you're going 3 hours, that's an overnight. That's quite seriously how it is. People visit me, if they're only in for a little while, we'll do things in town, because to drive the half hour to Providence, you have to make a day of it. But anyway, also in East Greenwich, the Steam Museum is certainly pretty exciting. They've got a sort of a steam and wireless museum that has examples of engines and technology from back when they had originally invented the wireless radio, and all the steam engines by Arlington and Sims and whatnot, generators of the type that Thomas Edison himself used. Again, it's one of these tiny museums that it's not on the map as far as most people are concerned, because it's not one of these big museums that has a large front out anywhere. There's a children's museum in Providence that people know about and have heard of, but the East Greenwich Steam and Wireless Museum, in spite of being, really, for the subject matter, is one of the better repositories of that kind of stuff that there is in the world. This has a lot of functional examples of steam engines and old wireless radio equipment that you can't find anywhere else. And yet it's all just sort of hidden, and because it's in a small town, in a small state, no one really knows about it, which is a shame.
As you went to research the book, I imagine that you learned a lot of things about Rhode Island in the process. What was the biggest surprise you learned?
Well, for me, the most surprising thing was how many things I didn't know about. Just the sheer mass of them. Because you figure in a small state, in terms of big, exciting cultural things, you pretty much know. You would know everything that's going on. I grew up not being able to walk into a restaurant with my father without him recognizing someone. It's just that kind of state. But at the same time, as I started doing research more and more for this book, I found out things I didn't know about. There's a secret museum in Bristol, and I guess it's a well-kept secret because I had no idea. It's actually a museum that the location is secret, and you have to apply to the guy online to find out where it is. I can't tell you on this podcast where this museum is. That's how secret it is.
Can you tell us where to apply online to find out?
I can. Yeah, it's called the Musée Patamécanique, and it's just www.museepata.org. That's MUSEEPATA.
And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. What is the museum about, and why is it secret? It seems counterproductive.
Well, it actually you'd think that, but it adds to sort of the mystique. It's all of patamechanics. It's by this guy who is at RISD, which is the Rhode Island School of Design, which I guess you would say is another one of the more known things in Rhode Island.
Sure.
But one of these RISD grads created this whole thing called patamechanics, which are these objects that are sort of half real and half not, using, mechanical things, and they're supposed to sort of involve all your senses. Again, it's sort of hard to explain, but they almost... transcend reality sounds a bit too strong. They'd like to say that, I'm sure. But it's essentially these bizarre machines that, if you are willing to suspend disbelief for a little while, can draw you even a little bit into another world. And it's all about presentation and mystique. The museum is not a large place. It's a small place with a small tour shows up, and the tour guide personally doesn't just point to you to things in the museum, but really presents it. And so to add to the mystique, you can't go unless you've prearranged.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Again, a lot of the most interesting things for me were the people, just because places you've sort of, I've heard of. There's a ton of places in Providence that, I could walk through, such as the Turk's Head or various architectural landmarks that I'd spent a lot of time visiting.
The Turk's Head.
Yeah, there's a building in Providence called the Turk's Head Building that on the corner of it, there's a giant stone bust of a Turk's head
Okay.
watching over the building. And apparently there used to be a wooden sign that was the Turk's Head. It was actually not the first Turk's Head that was on that location.
Okay.
There's the arcade, one of the first indoor shopping mall in America, and it's got 6 Romanesque columns in front and a different kind of architecture in back. But I mean, all the sort of architectural things, to me, I guess, weren't as surprising as just some of the fascinating characters that I came across as I was doing the research.
And what are sort of your top 3 characters as you think about the people you ran into?
Well, I mean, the first one that comes to mind would have to be David Gracer of Sunrise Land Shrimp. So land shrimp is, of course, a term for insects.
Okay.
And he runs a company. He describes himself as an entomophagist, someone who eats bugs, and would like to not only eat bugs himself, but educate others as to the benefits and joys of eating insects.
Okay.
And I mean, he's a fascinating character, not only because his mission is an atypical one, but also just meeting him was a joy because he invited me right into his house. He had a freezer filled with different kinds of frozen bugs. He said, "Let me cook you up something." He took out a frying pan. He cooked me up some bugs. I can send you a picture of that if I can find it. Then I sat around his kitchen table and ate bugs with him as we chatted about how he goes about educating people on the benefits of insect eating.
And did he convert you to an insect eater?
He sort of did. I'm an easy target because I sort of have a penchant for eating bizarre things anyway.
Okay.
But, I mean, his larger point was that a lot of people have sort of an inherent ick factor reaction to it, whereas it's largely, if you think about it, just a cultural thing. And in other countries, insects are eaten as a matter of course. They provide protein. If you think about it, it's really no more disgusting than any other animal we eat. They actually are very similar to crustaceans. An interesting thing I learned from chatting with him is that people who are allergic to crustaceans may often be allergic to eating insects as well.
Okay.
There's many different types. I mean, I don't want to go on forever about just the joys of eating insects, but I mean, I was there, and there's cicadas and water bugs, and there's some that are just the small little cicadas. You just fry them up, and they're crunchy, and you eat them in rice, and they're just like a garnish. Whereas you got these sort of big water bugs that you actually have to crack the shell open and then suck out the meat inside, more like a shrimp, and
now,
fascinating stuff.
I know cicadas come back every, 7 years or so. Does it have to be a good year for cicadas, for the cicadas to be particularly tasty?
I don't know. I haven't had enough insects to really make that kind of culinary
as much of a
judgment.
connoisseur. Okay.
Yeah, but someone at Johnson & Wales, I'm sure, could probably tell you, because they know everything about culinary stuff over there.
Other characters that really stood out?
Other characters. I did not meet him the first time when doing this book, but it would be a shame not to mention him just because Len Cabral is a storyteller, I guess, and sort of a nationally known storyteller. And I, again, half of the reason I did this book was just because I had things in my childhood that I felt were great and wanted to share with people. But I remember him, storytelling at a library, and now he's gone around and done it nationally and internationally. But he's just really one of America's greatest storytellers and, lives in Rhode Island, but originally he's Cape Verdean. But he was working at a daycare center, and he said, "You become a storyteller." But he's been telling stories for probably 4 decades now. And he goes all over the country and all over the world telling traditional tales, new stories, old African fables about Anansi, the trickster spider. And I haven't seen him recently, but when I saw him and knew him, he had hair down to about his ankles as well. And that's what I remember from growing up, is if there were 2 facts I could tell you about this man, is that 1, he tells the most amazing stories, and 2, he has the most amazing hair. Which I realize I'm sure he has many other fine characteristics as a person, but that's what one recalls at 5 years old, is that someone tells a good story and they have long hair. Really long hair.
Any other characters that stand out? I think we said top 3.
Well, certainly Matt the Knife is someone who was fascinating to talk to. I'd probably be remiss in not mentioning him just because he has such an interesting background. He's a magician, performer, sword swallower. I think he said of all there's 9 kinds of magic arts, and he does all of them except for children's magic. So he pretty much runs the gamut. He holds some obscene number of world records I think I'd interviewed him just after he was back from China setting a world record, and he was already off somewhere else doing a different world record. And his backstory was fascinating as well. I mean, the time he spent growing up, learning about what causes someone to, at a young age, come away with skills like sword swallowing and prestidigitation and everything else. He has the world record for just, completely disparate things. He has a world record for handcuff escaping. He has a world record for the fastest one-handed cutting of a deck of cards, straitjacket escaping, fire eating. In China, he did a fast underwater escape of handcuffs. And the other thing is that, and some of this I can't say on the podcast, but chatting with him about his background, I mean, he used to be a grifter and a con man and a card sharp. And, I mean, some of these skills, because things like dealing with handcuffs and cutting cards and doing things quick with your hands isn't always used on the up and up. I mean, he used to run a pickpocket ring from Boston to New York, and a shoplifting ring, and other things that I can't even tell you about.
Okay.
But definitely a completely fascinating character.
Interesting.
And if nothing else, I have to say, for a week before I was going to interview him, I just had the Mac the Knife song stuck in my head.
Well, that occurred to me already, too.
Yeah.
Was there a moment as you were researching this book, you heard about someone or something or some event, and you thought, only in Rhode Island?
Well, some of those things I couldn't put into the book as I was researching it, just because it wouldn't fit in the book, but it's quintessentially Rhode Island. Like, it's all due to the fact that it's a small state, but we'd read about someone who was just arrested for $800,000 of Medicare fraud. And my dad would say, oh, it's the guy from down the street. And then we'd read about someone else who just had, their business raided for some other immoral embezzlement of money or whatever. And my father would say, oh, that was a former client of mine. And it's just, everyone knows everyone in Rhode Island. I mean, when I meet someone else from Rhode Island, usually the traditional greeting is we go through, who do you know? Do you know this person? Do you know that person? And you go back and forth until you find a common link, because chances are, if both two people lived in Rhode Island for any length of time overlapping, they know someone in common.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's just the way it is. The real quintessential thing about the state that I found when I was researching was the love of low-number license plates. I mean, I guess I already knew that existed, because my family had a sort of a low-number plate, and at one point we had, one of the cleaning people we had hired offered to do a number of weeks for free if we would bequeath to her this license plate that we had. But there's just an irrational love of low-number plates. And so I was researching this because I didn't know whether I could get an entire article out of it, because, again, I can say, sure, Rhode Islanders love low-numbered license plates, but that's not really enough to put an article in a book, even though it's held to be true. But as I was doing the research for it, I found out that, the reason the low-number plates are valued is because they were often given away as political favors, and this extends, in fact, back to the very first plate ever printed, literally. It was back, 1904, when the very first license plate was issued. It was given to Dr. Rowland Robinson, and it was in gratitude for his brother's help in passing an automobile registration bill. His brother was a senator.
Huh.
So it's right from the beginning, the plates have been going out. And then former Governor Bruce Sutherland, was left because he transferred license plate number 7 to his wife. And it's just the whole history of Rhode Island, really. You can just track political favor by seeing where the low-number license plates go. I mean, someone once said, in England, you get a knighthood. In Rhode Island, you get a low plate number. I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, since in the past few years, they've instituted a lottery system to try to stop it from being just political favors. But even that didn't stop it. 2 years ago, there were some former judges who absconded with their judicial license plates and ignored all these subpoenas from the Supreme Court to return the plates. I mean, it's really, if there's one thing that's essentially Rhode Island, is that, Rhode Islanders love their low-number license plates, and no matter what the law is or who's asking for them, they will do whatever is within their power to get them.
Funny.
I don't think that would happen in any other state.
As we go to wrap this up, one moment that you thought, thank God I live in Rhode Island. Doesn't have to be associated with researching the book, but
in this case, it certainly would be. It would It would have to be the day that I had 3 interviews set up on completely 3 opposite corners of the state, all in one day. And I said to myself, "Thank God I'm not doing a book on Texas."
Any final thoughts to leave us with?
Being really small has a lot of advantages. I've always thought of it sort of as a city-state, which is slightly less true now that our Caesar, knee mayor, Buddy Zancy, was indicted and put in jail. I guess political corruption is another pretty Rhode Island thing. But, I mean, the fact that it functions as a city-state means that there's a connection between Rhode Islanders when they meet each other abroad that would normally only occur between other people from the same city, not the same state. And then I guess the other thing is the size just means if you're there, you can see whatever you want in Rhode Island all in one trip. Not everything, of course, but, pick any 5 things and you don't have to take a week to see them. You can see them in 2 days.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming. Our guest has been Seth Brown, and the book again is Rhode Island Curiosities. Seth, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chris.
I have just one internet resource for you today, and that's one that was sent to me by Ed Vodder from the Searching the Internet podcast a little while back. And that is an article actually coming from last year, but it's from Kiplinger's, and it's a list of their 25 best travel sites. And it lists everything from airfares, lodging, car rentals, cruises. Some of these we've already mentioned in this show before, but I thought it was a pretty good list. Ed, thank you for that. I'll put links in the show notes both to Ed's podcast as well as to this Kiplinger article. This week's show is coming out a little later, so I'll just read one of the emails I got this week, which was from Jeff. Jeff writes, I have a 40-mile drive to work through the wilds of northern New Hampshire, and I just wanted to tell you that I usually listen to your podcast on the way. It is really the best podcast out there, at least for travel. Well, thanks very much, Jeff. I have enjoyed the shows which talk about biking, as I have taken my bike overseas on several occasions, including Scottish Islands, the Azores, Corsica, and Provence. I have been invited on an expensive bike tour in Tuscany in September, but have never taken an organized tour before. I find that you meet many more of the locals and spend a lot less money when you just go ahead and do it on your own. My family and I biked around Corsica, and we didn't make any reservations except for the first night. It turned out to be one of the best trips we ever had. I guess people do what they feel comfortable with. All of the best with your continued success with the podcast and your travels, Jeff. Thanks very much for your letter, Jeff. If you also want to comment about anything you've heard on the show, send me an email at host@amateurtraveler.com. You can also go to the comments section, amateurtraveler.com/comments, and leave a voice comment using the My Chingo button, or you can call the comment line at 408-8494-POD. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
The best and the brightest, served up daily by the sharpest minds in content delivery, Podshow and Limelight.